A whole month after that, Caroline and Andrew were excited to go to their ultrasound appointment. They were excited not only to possibly get the baby's gender, but to also listen to their thumping little heart beating. Caroline laid back in the examination bed. Andrew sat beside her, holding her hand and stroking her hair back. The nurse was getting the ultrasound machine and Caroline's belly ready. Caroline felt a sudden rush of cold. It made her shiver and felt the coldness go down her spine and into her toes. She looked at Andrew, who smiled and pointed to the ultrasound screen. Caroline turned as soon as the nurse started looking for the baby. The nurse turned up the volume so everyone could hear the baby's heart beating. The nurse and Andrew started nodding and looked at Caroline with big smiles. Caroline shook her head confused because she couldn't hear anything. Not even the nurse or Andrew. She looked at them and their lips moving, but she couldn't hear a thing. She looked up at the screen and didn't see the baby either, just a gray screen glitching with white. She closed her eyes and then felt two huge hands grab her head and pull her back towards the examination bed. She opened her eyes and she saw Andrew looking at the screen, unfazed by Caroline's discomfort. She started screaming out to him and tried to grab him, but her hands were also being held back and she couldn't raise them at all. Andrew looked at her and laughed and smiled and said something she couldn't hear. She screamed back at him to help her, but he kept looking at her with a big smile. Caroline then heard a deep low growl right next to her ear. She turned her head towards it and felt a hot wave of air. The growling grew louder and deeper. She then heard the words, "Caroline, this baby is going to be mine. You can't fight it, you won't win, this is my baby." Caroline started shaking in hope to release herself from what was holding her down. She suddenly sat up and Andrew looked at her in disappointment. She looked at the screen and it had already been turned off. She didn't get to hear or see her baby. Andrew helped her get ready and they headed home. On the drive, Caroline didn't want to say what she had experienced at the clinic, but she also wanted to know about her baby. Andrew was quiet and didn't say much on the drive. He would only keep looking at Caroline and smiled. Caroline felt like she was going crazy. She didn't know what was happening to her, and ever since she got pregnant, she felt very much unlike her usual self. She kept thinking it was probably the hormones and just physical stress, but something else just didn't feel right. Weeks went by and Caroline kept feeling unwell and she started seeing more and more things. She would feel like she was being watched all the time. She would see dark shadows move from the corner of her eye, especially when she walked past the baby's nursery. She would see dark figures just watching her, around door frames and corners in the rooms she was in. She blamed it all on fatigue and just kept going. The cramps got worse, and whenever baby moved, Caroline felt weakness take over her body and the worst pain imaginable. She felt sharp pain when the baby kicked and almost as if the baby were scratching their way from the inside out. Caroline was miserable, and each week the discomfort, as well as the intensity of the pain grew. At week 38, she was drained and almost feeling guilty about ever wanting to have a baby. Each kick and movement, she closed her eyes and held her breath to hold in the intense pain she was feeling. Razor blades and needles is what she felt. The cramps were so strong since the beginning, she was afraid of what the real labor contractions would feel like. Caroline tried to get good sleep before the baby's arrival, but every night she was woken up by either a nightmare, night sweats, or terrifying voices and sounds. The night that Caroline turned exactly 40 weeks pregnant, she started feeling very strong contractions in her sleep. She woke up and sat up and woke Andrew. She knew this was the real thing, and she was in the beginning stages of labor. She started grabbing her bags and went to wait for Andrew in the car. The contractions were exponentially getting worse and Andrew was still inside. Caroline grew impatient and went back into the house. Andrew was nowhere to be found, and Caroline stopped mid-stride to hold on to the wall, while another contraction took place. Andrew ran up to her and held her meanwhile it passed. He then helped her get into the car. Caroline started feeling pins and needles all over her pregnant belly, and what felt like her skin was about to burst open. She screamed in agony, and Andrew drove faster. Another contraction began, and she felt her skin stretch and felt a burning sensation by her belly button. She screamed out again, and then everything went dark. Caroline blacked out for the rest of the drive to the hospital. She woke up to a faint beeping sound and people rushing back and forth all around her. She tried sitting up, but she had no feeling in her legs. She looked down and saw herself sitting on blood-stained sheets and Andrew standing and facing away in a corner, speaking to a nurse. The nurse looked back at Caroline, then Andrew turned, holding a small bundled-up baby in his arms. They both walked up to Caroline and Andrew leaned in to give Caroline a kiss on her forehead. She looked at the bundle and reached out for it. Andrew leaned in and started handing Caroline the tiny bundle. He looked at her and said with a smile, "Isn't she gorgeous?" He kissed the baby and Caroline once more and walked around to a chair. Caroline looked at her baby and began to cry. It was the most beautiful baby she'd ever seen and felt her heart full. All the pain and guilt and burden melted away as she held her baby. Everyone cleared out, including Andrew, to let the new mother and child bond and get some rest. Baby was asleep in her little hospital bassinet and Caroline began to doze off. Moments later Caroline felt a cold chill and woke up to the baby crying. She turned towards it. She saw 3 dark shadows next to the baby's bassinet, bending over and into it. Caroline's eyes widened and then the shadows were gone. She pulled herself up and looked into the bassinet, where her baby was fast asleep. She remembered the words she had heard growled into her ear the day of the ultrasound, and she started getting anxious and almost hyperventilating. She called for a nurse, and one arrived shortly. Caroline asked for water and something for a headache she felt sprouting. She looked at her baby. Meanwhile the nurse came back and after taking the pill, she laid back down and fell asleep. Caroline could hear some birds singing and felt sunlight on her face. She slowly opened her eyes and found herself laying down on her couch in her living room. She looked towards the window, and it looked like it was late afternoon. She sat up and leaned her head back for a few seconds. She then heard Andrew walking out from his office and into the room with her. He kissed her forehead and sat across from her. They looked at each other, and Andrew asked Caroline if she needed anything. She asked for a glass of water, and he stood up and went towards the kitchen. She settled into her seat and put her hands in her sweater pockets. She then felt something in it and pulled it out. She looked into her hand and stared at the negative pregnancy test she had just taken that morning. She heard Andrew walking back, and she hurriedly put it back in her pocket. Andrew sat next to her and asked if she felt like going for a walk, since she had napped all morning. She looked into her husband's eyes and nodded in agreement. She thought about her nightmare the rest of the day. Although she was disappointed that she wasn't pregnant, she knew that becoming a mother would happen when it was meant to be.